It was supposed to be a promotion meeting. That is what they told me. After 15 years of giving everything I had to this company, days, nights, missed birthdays, red-eye flights, and weekends swallowed whole by deadlines, I walked into that boardroom thinking it was finally my turn to move forward. I had no idea I was about to be fired by a man who had no clue who actually owned the building he was sitting in. My name is Robert Hale. I had been with the company since the days when we operated out of 2 cramped floors downtown. Back then, we shared desk phones, faxed documents, and manually backed up files on clunky external drives. I was 28, fresh off a rough start at a smaller firm where I had learned more from failure than any textbook ever taught me. I joined as a systems analyst, back when that role meant doing a bit of everything and saying yes to every challenge thrown at you. I never imagined how far it would take me, or what it would cost me, 15 years. I had seen 4 CEOs come and go. Some were strategic, some just loud. I learned to survive regardless. I had built teams from scratch, restructured entire departments, and turned projects around that others had abandoned. I became the guy you called when things went sideways. I never asked for recognition. I was not flashy. I just delivered. A few months before the meeting, things started to shift. The company was bought out by an investment group, one of those quiet transitions where nothing seems to change until everything does. New executive faces started appearing in the hallways, new logos on emails. Then came the new CEO. His name was Declan Ward, mid-40s, immaculately dressed. A consultant type turned executive, known for turnaround strategies that often meant cutting the people who had built the very systems he called inefficient. He introduced himself in a town hall as someone who believed in restructuring for growth, which, if you have been in corporate long enough, you know is code for, "We are going to start cutting." I stayed out of his way. I had enough credibility and internal support that I figured I was safe, or at the very least, valuable. Then came the invitation. I got a calendar invite from Human Resources for a development and advancement review. It was vague, but not unusual. These meetings typically happened in Q2 as performance cycles closed. I assumed it was about the director role I had been informally promised months ago. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early. I always do. I sat in the hallway outside conference room 4B, sipping a coffee I did not finish. I saw Declan arrive, pressed, suit, tailored overcoat, and that air of confidence that comes from not worrying about what happens after decisions are made. He gave me a polite nod. I returned it. Neither of us spoke. Inside, 2 people were already seated. Lena from HR and someone I did not recognize. Later, I learned he was from the new ownership group. No one explained that at the time. Declan opened the meeting with a warm smile. "Robert, thank you for joining us. We wanted to take this opportunity to have a candid conversation about where things are going." I nodded. I had been in enough meetings to read tone. "Something was off," he continued. "We have been reviewing the new structure and, unfortunately, there will be some realignments. Your position is being dissolved, effective immediately." I waited for him to clarify. He did not. "Let me be clear," he said. "This is not about performance. Your work has been outstanding. But the organization is shifting focus, and your role no longer fits into the long-term model." Just like that. I stared at him. Not angry, not panicked, just still. Lena slid a folder across the table. It had my name printed on the cover. Inside was a separation agreement, 2-month severance, a confidentiality clause, and a non-compete. Statement that was laughable given what I knew. "I see," I said quietly. He gave me that sympathetic look executives use to soften the blow of decisions they made 3 weeks ago in a spreadsheet. "I know this is difficult," he said. "But sometimes change is necessary." What he did not know, what he never bothered to research, was that 6 years earlier, during a financial crisis, the company needed outside investment to stay afloat. A group of former employees, including myself, pooled our capital and acquired a minority ownership stake under a silent equity agreement. It was structured through a trust, layered under two holding entities. We never intended to interfere. We believed in the people. We let the board operate independently. But I had a seat at the table he did not even know existed. I looked at the folder in front of me. Then I looked at him. "Declan," I said, still calm, "how long have you been with us now?" He blinked. "Just over 4 months." "And in that time, how many hours have you spent talking to the teams who actually keep the systems
Running?
He paused. "I have reviewed the operational reports extensively." I smiled. A small, tired smile. "You should probably ask someone on the board to walk you through what a silent partner actually is. Before you start pushing people out of rooms." "They built?" He looked confused, almost annoyed. "This meeting is concluded," I said. I stood, took the folder, and walked out. I did not slam the door. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. By the time I got to my car, I had 3 voicemails from people who had already heard whispers. In our world, news moves fast, especially when it is the wrong kind of news, but I did not call anyone back, not yet. That afternoon, I had a meeting of my own. It was off-site, with someone who actually had the power to change what came next, because here is the thing. Being fired is not the end. Not if you know what game is really being played. Especially when you helped write the rules. I did not sleep much that night. Not because I was angry, though I probably had every reason to be, but because my mind would not stop sorting through details. The way Declan spoke to me. The look on Lena's face. The man from the ownership group who said nothing the entire time. Silence can be louder than a decision. And something about that meeting told me this was not just about streamlining titles. The off-site meeting I had that afternoon was already on my calendar before the morning unfolded. It was not tied to anything public. No emails, no official invite. Just a quiet lunch scheduled months ago with someone I trusted. Someone who had also signed their name on that silent partnership agreement 6 years earlier. We met at a small, Italian place tucked behind an office plaza. Quiet, unassuming, the kind of place executives go when they do not want to be seen by other executives. He was already seated when I walked in. He did not stand to greet me, just raised his hand like always, and gave that same slight nod we had exchanged over 100 times. "Thought this might be a celebratory lunch," he said as I sat down. I took a breath. Promotion meeting turned out to be a termination. His brow furrowed. "You are kidding." I shook my head. "Declan let me go this morning. Role dissolved. Restructuring." He leaned back in his chair and looked away for a moment. "He really does not know, does he?" "No," I said. "He has no idea who signed the checks that got him his office in the first place." For the next hour, we talked through the layers. The structure of the trust, the legal protections, the original charter and voting rights. When we first invested, the goal was never control. It was preservation. We wanted to protect the culture, the people, the values that made the company worth saving. We trusted the executive team back then. They communicated with us, brought us into the loop when key hires were made. Declan was the first hire pushed through without our involvement, technically allowed but politically sloppy. And now he had fired one of the firm's silent owners without realizing the web he had stepped into. "You going to tell the board?" my colleague asked. "Not yet," I said. "There is a better way." I was not interested in walking into a room and throwing my weight around. That was not my style. I had seen what ego did to smart people. What I wanted was information. Real context. I needed to understand what Declan's actual plans were. If he was cutting quietly or laying the groundwork for something more disruptive. Either way, I wanted it on record. I spent the next few days doing what I do best: listening. I reached out to a few people I trusted, not with my story but with questions. Subtle ones. What is morale like under the new leadership? Anyone else being moved around lately? Getting any strange requests from upstairs? What came back to me painted a picture more alarming than I expected. 3 directors had been reassigned in the past 2 weeks, all under the label of strategic realignment. 2 had been offered early retirements. Another had quietly exited without explanation. None of them were underperformers. All of them were people who had long institutional memory. People who could ask the kind of questions Declan probably did not want to answer. I kept notes, names, dates, patterns. Then I made a call. One I had been holding off on. It went to voicemail, but I knew it would be returned quickly. And it was. "Robert," she said. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" "I am fine," I replied, "but I think the board needs to see what is really happening before this becomes irreversible." The woman on the other end was not just a contact. She was the firm's general counsel, one of the few left who knew about the partnership arrangement. She was not a shareholder herself, but she had written the original paperwork and understood the implications better than anyone. We scheduled a formal meeting. No lunch, no off-the-record chat. This would be official and discreet. I sent over everything I had: documents, timelines, internal memos, and the signed termination papers Declan gave me. She promised to review it all and follow up in 72 hours. While I waited, I did not stay idle. I went back through the original acquisition paperwork, the agreements that brought in the current investment group. I wanted to know if they had voting control, or if the original charter still gave us a veto under certain conditions. What I found was clear. The silent partners retained minority voting rights on executive removal, but only if a formal complaint was raised through internal governance first. It had never been used. Until now, there had never been a need. But Declan had forced our hand. 3 days later, I was invited to an unlisted meeting with 2 members of the board. One I knew well, the other I had only met in passing over the years. It was set in a private meeting room in a downtown law office. No company logos, no press. Just 3 chairs and 1 long table. "Robert," the senior board member said, "we have reviewed your documentation. It is concerning." I nodded. He is replacing people who know the core systems with new hires who do not even understand the history of the platform. He is calling it innovation. It is not. It is exposure. "Do you believe he is doing this maliciously?" the other asked. "No," I said honestly. "I believe he is doing what he was trained to do: strip, rebrand, and flip. That is his playbook. He has done it before. But that is not why we invested. That is not why we kept the company alive. He is not building for the long term. He is packaging us for resale." The room went quiet. Then came the inevitable question. "Are you prepared to formally file a complaint under the governance provision?" I looked across the table. "Yes, I am." That single sentence set off a chain reaction I would not fully understand until weeks later. Because behind every company with real weight, there are unseen layers, structures built not just with capital, but with intention, with history, with people who remember what it used to be before the Polish, before the outside money, before the restructuring experts came in with their binders and buzzwords. Declan had made a mistake. He had fired a person he assumed was just another name, on a spreadsheet. But spreadsheets cannot see what sits behind the curtain. He had not just removed a long-standing employee. He had pulled the wrong thread, and the entire fabric was about to shift. Declan found out 2 weeks later. Not from me, not from the board, and not from the general counsel. He found out from the silence. The kind of silence that follows when messages go unanswered. When your weekly touch base gets postponed for the 3rd time. When board members you used to joke with start using phrases like pending review and outside assessment, that type of silence. Sharp, intentional. He must have noticed the difference. People like him always do, eventually. But they rarely understand the cause right away. For men like Declan, distance feels like disloyalty, not accountability. So, I imagine at first he told himself the board was just distracted, busy, focused on other things, maybe even letting him spread his wings a bit. But when that distance stayed cold, when the smiles faded, that is when I knew it had started. Meanwhile, I stayed in the background. I did not come back into the office. I did not send any angry letters. I did not post anything online or reach out to people inside the company to stir the pot. There was no need. The wheels were already in motion, and I had nothing left to prove. I spent those weeks meeting quietly with the few remaining people I trusted in the firm. Retired partners, former team leads, and the original founder who still kept a low profile in our city, far removed from corporate politics. We all had something in common. We remembered when the company still felt like it belonged to the people who built it. It was a Friday when I got the call. The number came from a private line. When I picked up, it was the board chair. He did not waste time. "We have completed our internal review," he said. "And we need to meet. Monday morning, full session." I knew what that meant. A full board session meant formal consideration. Not just informal discussions or legal consultation, but votes. And votes meant outcomes. I arrived early that Monday. The meeting took place in a tower across the city, away from our company headquarters. I was ushered into a waiting room while the directors met in private. I was not nervous. I had already laid out everything they needed weeks ago: dates, contracts, timelines, and policies that Declan had bent just far enough to seem clever, but not careful. Eventually, I was brought in. There were 9 of them around the table. I recognized all but 2. The chair began. "Mr. Hale, thank you for joining us. We have reviewed the circumstances surrounding your termination, your silent partnership, and the broader implications of recent leadership decisions." I said nothing, just nodded. "We have decided to exercise the governance clause allowing for executive review. This is not something we take lightly. But given the number of recent departures and the potential risks tied to current strategic shifts, we believe it is necessary." I waited. I knew what came next. "We would like your recommendation." I looked around the table and spoke clearly without bitterness. "Replace him," I said. "Not because of me. Not because of the way I was let go. Replace him because he does not understand what this company was built for. Because he sees people as cost centers. Because he is solving for margins, not momentum. And if you let that mindset continue, there will be no company left to protect." There was no rebuttal, no argument, no corporate dance. They had already made up their minds. 3 days later, Declan was asked to step down. The formal statement cited strategic misalignment, but those of us who knew the details understood exactly what had happened. I did not return to my old role. That chapter was closed. Instead, I took a seat on the advisory committee, something I had declined when the ownership agreement was first signed. Back then, I believed that being in the shadows gave me clarity. Now I understood that silence only works if the people in charge are listening, and Declan never was. The company brought in an interim executive, not flashy, not loud, but steady. Someone who had been with the firm during its early expansions. Someone who remembered names, not just functions. Within a month, 2 key directors who had been pushed out quietly were invited back as consultants. Not in the same roles, but with influence where it mattered. Culture, product, relationships. That was the real core of the business anyway. The funny thing is, most people inside the company never even knew what happened behind the scenes. They just noticed that meetings started to feel different. More focused, less combative. They noticed that people stopped walking on eggshells. That trust began to return, not through memos, but through action. And Declan? He disappeared into another consultancy. That is what people like him do. One day he will walk into a new firm and sell them the same story. New ideas, streamlined execution, strategic modernization, and maybe it will work for them. But here, we remembered. I remember one moment in particular, weeks after everything settled down. I walked past our main campus one afternoon, not to go in, just to see it. It was spring. The windows were open, and from the sidewalk I could hear someone laughing from one of the upper floors. It was faint, distant, but it was the first time in a long time the place felt alive again. I smiled, not because I had won, but because I had protected what mattered. That was never about revenge. It was about responsibility, about doing what had to be done, quietly and completely, even when no one is looking. Especially then, because titles come and go. Executives rise and fall. But ownership, real ownership, is not a contract. It is a choice, a commitment to something bigger than your own name on the door, and some people will never understand that. 6 months passed, then a year. The dust settled, as it always does. People moved on, some faster than others, some by choice, others quietly, without ceremony. The company did not collapse. It did not surge forward either. It stabilized. That was what it needed most. Not reinvention, not disruption, stability, a foundation without cracks pretending to be marble. The interim executive stayed on longer than planned. Eventually, the board made the role permanent. I was asked to be part of the decision process, and I took it seriously. Not because I wanted to pull strings, but because this time I wanted to make sure the right voice had the room to speak without needing to shout. That was the difference. Declan led through dominance. The new leadership led through presence. It was quieter but more effective. The changes were subtle. The bloated initiatives got trimmed down. Middle management, which had ballooned during Declan's tenure, was restructured into something leaner, but not rushed. The HR team was given more than a compliance function. They were actually allowed to advocate again. For people. For clarity. For direction. A few of the people I had worked with for years, some who had been phased out unfairly, came back. One returned as a strategic advisor. Another was brought in to rebuild the mentorship program we had lost under Declan. Not the performative kind that sits on an intranet page. The real kind. One-on-one time. Hands-on support. Quiet accountability. And me? I stayed on the advisory side. No title. No office. No staff. I did not want it. I had done the work. Made the hard call. My job now was to stay out of the way, but available. I made it clear to the board that my ownership came with responsibility, not interference. If they ever needed a check against drift, I was there. Not to steer, just to remind. Some days I felt the urge to go back. To step inside those glass doors again, sit across from familiar faces, and pick up where things had left off before that meeting. But I always stopped myself. You cannot go back to something once it breaks like that. Not without changing the way you walk through the world. So instead, I started something new. Not a company, not a venture. Nothing that needed a pitch deck or logo, just a conversation. One I had been avoiding for years. It started small, a few coffee meetings. Some old colleagues who had gone independent. Others who had been squeezed out of companies. They helped build, all for the sake of alignment or agility. Words used to wrap disrespect in acceptable packaging. What I found was a pattern. People were not just leaving companies. They were being removed, gently or brutally, right at the point they became most valuable. Right when their experience should have earned them space, they were shown the door. not for poor performance, but because someone else wanted a shortcut to a seat they had not earned. And I could not ignore it anymore, so I created a quiet network. No name, no formal mission, just a place where people like us could talk without pretending we were fine. We shared stories, patterns, legal advice, emotional fallout. How to rebuild your self-worth when the rug is pulled out from beneath you in a room where you once felt safe. The stories were brutal, not dramatic, real, subtle manipulations, private praise, public dismissal, gaslighting through performance reviews, promotions that came with no power, just more exposure to blame. But there were stories of strength, too, of people rebuilding, not just careers, but reputations, integrity, confidence, and those were the ones I held on to. At one of our early sessions, a woman told us how she had been let go from her firm after reporting unethical procurement practices. No support, no exit package, nothing but a cold walk out the back door. A year later, the company came under investigation. That same woman? She had quietly built a firm of her own. Smaller, ethical, profitable. Her client list included 2 of her former employer's largest accounts. It reminded me of something I had forgotten. You do not need revenge when you have resolve. A few years into this work, I got a message. Not from anyone in my network, not from a colleague, from someone inside the company, someone new. They had joined right after Declan left and had no idea about my history there. No idea what I had been through. They had just heard bits and pieces from senior staff. But they reached out anyway. Thank you, the message said. I do not know all the details, but the culture you protected, it made this place survivable. I do not dread Mondays anymore. I just wanted you to know that. I read it twice. And for the first time in a long while I felt at peace. Not because I had fixed everything, but because I had done something worth protecting. When I think back to that promotion meeting now, the one where I was fired, I do not replay the sting. I do not dwell on the insult. I remember one specific detail. As Declan stood there reading from that little folder, explaining how this is where we part ways, I remember watching his hand shake, just a little, barely noticeable. But it was there. He was not as certain as he acted, and now, years later, I understand why. He thought he had power. He had authority, but he never had ownership. That was mine, and that is something no title can ever replace. So when people ask me what I do now, I do not give them a title or job description. I just say, I keep the lights on where people thought it had gone dark, because every company has its seasons. But some things, dignity, truth, respect, those should never be seasonal.